All right, welcome everyone. I guess it's time to get started with this virtual tutorial, which is dedicated to contributing translations to R. My name is Gergely Daroczi, and as you can see from the slides, I'm a technical person at RX Studio, where R has been super important in our journey. We have been using R to generate tables, reports, charts, recommend personalized drug doses, using multiple natural languages. So we use R to generate text for clinicians in English, Portuguese, Spanish, French, and so on. And that's how I got involved with the working group related to managing translations in R in the past few years. Besides my role at RX Studio, I'm also a co-organizer of the Hungarian R meetup, and I also helped organizing a few local conferences like the first Saturday's conference or the second ERAM conference. And I'm also helping with managing a service or server dedicated to the art project. More on that later in a few minutes. So the agenda for today, as you can see here, is I would like to go through some resources that might be useful for you in the future when it comes to translations. I would like to cover at least a little bit of history on how translations were managed in R. I think it's useful to have some context on that. And then we will get to the main topic on how to translate our messages in the traditional way of opening up PO files, editing those text files, and contributing back to our core by submitting a patch, and also looking at some modern tools to help with that process, namely Weblate, which can help with automating most of that process. Last, I would like to cover some of the community aspects of translating messages in R and review some of the guidelines that have been implemented in the past. So hopefully this sounds cute to the group. I'm very happy to get any feedback, questions, or recommendations on these topics. This is a webinar format on Zoom, if I'm right. So if you have any questions or feedback, you can use the Q&A feature of Zoom. So you should be able to see a related button where you can write a comment that should pop up on my screen and I can react. Or you can also click on the raise hand button so that you get the permission to speak and we can discuss things in a more interactive way. I would suggest to do that later when it comes to debugging some issues later on when we get to the actual translations. But if you need to uh, get access to the microphone and camera, please let us know by clicking on that button. All right, so before we actually get started with the topics, I wanted to get some feedback from you all. So I prepared a very short uh, questionnaire for you. I'm sending this to everyone on the chat, but you can also grab this QR code with your phone or type in that bit.ly URL. There will be three questions, and I'm mostly interested in where are you dialing in from, how familiar you are with translating any kind of software, so not only related to R, and also what languages you are interested in translating, because I really hope that we can reserve some time today to do some actual translations. So please fill in this form and I will pull up the results in a bit so that we know what languages will be important in the rest of this webinar. Okay, answers coming in. Thank you very much. I will wait a minute so that everyone has the chance to contribute. All right. I think almost everyone filled in the form so far. Thank you very much for that. I see multiple folks joining from Germany and Switzerland, and also others from Austria, Poland, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Thailand, Turkey, and the US as well. Welcome, everyone. It's really great to have you here. 75% has no experience with translating software, which is great. I mean, that's a good audience for this introductory tutorial. So we will cover uh, everything that you need to get started with translating R. And regarding the languages you are interested in translating R into, there are many options marked: simplified Chinese, Hindi, Spanish, French, Arabic, Bengali, Portuguese, Russian, and so on. Uh, Thank you very much. I highly appreciate the feedback. So really looking forward to get all these contributions to our in the next hour. So regarding the resources that you could use later on if you want to get more details about translating R's, I included a few blog posts and tutorials from the past. One I would like to highlight from Heather Turner and Saranjit Kaur is the Translating R Messages blog post on rproject.org from around 2 years ago, where they have covered a lot of interesting topics like why it's worth contributing back to the R community uh, by translations, and also some statistics like you can see on this screen. First of all, what I would like to highlight is the number of messages in R that can be translated. And by the number of messages here, I refer to the messages, warnings, and the error messages that are being printed in the R console. And you can see that around 2 years ago, there was around 6,000 such messages. Nowadays, it's more than 8,000 as far as I know, so it's continuously growing. What's great is that there are quite a few languages which have almost 100% coverage. So French, Italian, Russian, Lithuanian, uh, uh, languages have translated almost every single string. And there are a bunch of other languages with a very good coverage. And I would also add like Portuguese, which had around 50% of coverage. And there are many other languages with lower numbers. Another view on the same is looking at the lag in the translation of a string and when it was added to R. What's important from here is that when the lag is relatively low, that means that the languages are kept up to date. So for French, Lithuanian, Russian, Chinese, Korean, Polish, and a few others are updated very frequently. There are some other languages where those are not up to date, and I could add an example here on Hungarian, actually, where I'm dialing in from, and that's my natural language that I use every day, is that the Hungarian language was used for translations for only a couple of days, actually, around 2010, by a single person who was the translation lead for the Hungarian language. And I can totally name him because he contributed a lot. So Norbert Csormosi translated, I think, around 50%, 15% of all the messages into Hungarian, contributed it to our core. But since then, no one touched the Hungarian translation. So I was super happy to pick that up and continue that effort. But the lag is well over 15 years now. If you're interested in more recent statistics, you can look at the translations dashboard, which is auto-generated from Subversion, and also the Weblate Git repos, and you can see more up-to-date view on that. First of all, I would like to highlight is that the number of messages is much higher, around 9,000. And if I go back and look at the percentage for Portuguese that I highlighted was around 50%. For Spanish, it was a lot lower. Nowadays, Spanish actually has full coverage. So in the past 2 years, folks and the Spanish translation team were super active and translated all the messages in Bazar, which is great. Hats off to them. Some other resources that I would like to recommend, first of all, Professor Brian Ripley has written more than 10 years ago a post on R project.org about how to translate our messages. And this is a rather technical document getting into the details of the PO file structure and how to create new PO files for new languages, how to compile the PO files to MO files, and then contribute back to our core by creating a tar archive of the created translation files and send it back to our core. So this is a super good overview on how translations work in R, but there are some more recent guides as well. For example, the R Developers Guide has a chapter dedicated to translations, which gets into the same details, but I think in a more developer-friendly way. So here you can also read about the structure of PO files that we will cover today, briefly, how to compile the MO files from the PO files, which is required if you would like to test the translations in R, and then also the use of Weblate that we will cover today. Other than that, I would like to highlight two video content from the past. One is a workshop at the previous user by Michael Chirico and Michael Lawrence about translating R using the original approach, so editing PO files and then contributing back as a patch file, and also Beatrice Mills' recorded talk at the Latin R hackathon, which is in Spanish, which gets into the details of using Weblate for that translation that we will cover today. And I would like to mention again that translation as a community effort. From that perspective, I think it's pretty trivial that when you are writing code, it's always good to have a code review. So someone else reviewing your code before merging the pull request or merge request. The same stands for translations as well. So instead of directly committing translations, it's really good to have some others review and make sure that the translations are high quality, and we will review some of the related guidelines that has been already implemented at the past R project sprint. A little bit of history, because I think it's fantastic to know that translations have been supported in R for almost 2 decades. As you can see here, the gettext support was introduced uh, in R version 2.1, so a long time ago, which means that we are using the open source gettext ecosystem to do the translations, which provides the PO and POT file structure and some related C functions to do the lookups for the translations. All this is managed within the subversion repo of our core. If you're looking at the number of messages in our core, you can see that it's constantly growing, except for some R releases, and we have seen that it's up to like 9,000 nowadays. What's interesting is that around 2010, there was a web-based service to help translation teams to manage translations in different languages using Poodle, which is, I think, a PHP-based web application with support for gettext PO files. Unfortunately, this service was well, what I know, it disappeared a few years later. So I'm getting some feedback. So maybe someone has some questions. No. All right then. So this web service was around for a couple of years, and folks could contribute translations to the R language without editing text files and preparing patch files for R core by entering a web service URL and making the edits in a web page. Unfortunately, this was stopped at some point, and there was a smaller group who wanted to revive that approach and make translations more accessible for everyone. Quite a few years has passed, and huge thanks to Heather Turner for starting the R contribution working group and then getting folks to provide some materials for others so that they can contribute translations to R. For example, the tutorial at the previous user by Michael Lawrence and Michael Chirico that I mentioned. And following up on that, we created a POC Weblate installation, which is a similar tool to the mentioned Pootle service. So it's a web page where you can actually translate R strings, and a team managing the Weblate server can take care of contributing back all those translations to our core. So the end user, the translator, do not need to get into the technical details of patching PO files and so on, but they can use a relatively straightforward, user-friendly web page to make the translations. Last year, this was one of the projects at the R project sprint to make some improvements in this Weblate servers, and many teams picked up on using Weblate because it can really help with the boring parts of the translation. So both the previously mentioned technical bits, and it also integrates some AI tools to help with the translations. So this is the background that I wanted to share, and now we can switch to the actual translation. So we are looking into the PO file structures and how those are being used by R, which is, I think, a useful context, even if you are using Weblate or a similar tool for the translations later on. So first of all, I am printing the source code of LM here, and I'm sure that LM is familiar to everyone who has joined because everyone has run at least a linear model in R, at least who is interested in this topic. And I highlighted a getTextF function call here with a string and a variable throwing a warning to the user. And let's not get into the details like when this is being triggered. The important thing is that there's a string here with double quotes, which is handled by the getTextF function. And this getTextX function will look up if there's a translation for the string for the local of the user. And if there is, then instead of this English sentence or string, it will use the localized version of this and do the string interpolation using the method function within the getTextF function. What's being done in the background is highlighted here. So let's look up a translation file. This is for Portuguese, if I recall correctly, and you can see that in the PO file that's being looked up by getTextF, we check what's the translated version of that, and I can actually click on that link and look up. This is the PO file, and here we can find that message ID, which is the English version of the message, and the local version translated into Portuguese. So when your local is set to Portuguese in R, then you would get this message if you're trying to use LM with a method not equal to the default QR. This is an example of such PO file that we have just looked up in the GitHub mirror of the R sources. And let's review the structure of a PO file, which will be useful in Weblate as well. So first of all, you can place a comment anywhere in the file that would be disregarded by the translation lookup. But what's important is that you have to start a file with an empty message ID and message string, so some boilerplate on the top. After that, there's some metadata, which includes the R version, the name of the last translator, email address to the translation team, the language being translated, and a few other things. And then there's a message ID and message string pair, which is going on in the file as we have seen on GitHub. So in this case, the ord must be a positive integer string is to be translated into Slovenian in this file. The message string is empty, so there's no Slovenian translation for this string, which means that if someone starts R on Slovenian local, then the English text would be printed. Looking at the other markups in the PO file, I would like to highlight the extracted comments besides the previously mentioned comments. So if there's a dot after the hash sign, that means that those comments were extracted from the source code. So maybe the developer of a function is providing some context for the translator on how to translate different terms. We can also include references. The reference is usually a pointer to the source file so that you can look up the related context. You can also provide different flags. Most of the flags are standard. So for example, the most commonly used flag is fuzzy, which means that the translation is not 100% perfect. It needs review. Another flag is the C format, which means that a string includes some markups for string interpolation that we will review in a bit. And then we have some other references, but the most important and always available lines are the message ID and the message string. Let's look at a few examples that we will see in Weblate as well. This is an example from the uh, British English translation of R, and you can see that the message ID actually starts with two references. The first one is percentage %d, another percentage %s. The first one is a decimal number reference that will be replaced by R with an actual number. And the second one, if you are familiar with printf or any other functions, this stands for a string. So R would replace these two references with a variable and print that value lower than 0 is omitted from the logarithmic plot. So we have two references. The other thing I would like to highlight in this PO file is that there's not a single message ID, but there's a second one with the plural suffix. And similarly, there are two message strings as well. The difference is, as you can see here, is the extra S. So there's a specific language for the singular version of a string, and there's a plural version as well. In other languages, this can be similarly straightforward, like this is the Italian version of the same PO file. You can see that instead of the trailing S, we are using an I instead of the E for the plural form. But for some other languages, it can be much more complicated. For example, here, there are different versions when the number is 0, or sorry, 1, 2, or even more. And it really depends on the actual language. If I go back to some of the previous slides, you can see that the plural forms markup is actually printed here. So that's part of the PO file definition. I think what's important for you is that depending on the language you are translating to, and actually you are very familiar with the language you are translating into, you will know that if there's one, two, or even multiple forms for the same term, depending on the number of items. An extra flag highlighted here, the fuzzy, as mentioned previously, means that the translation is not perfect. Someone should review and make any updates if necessary. If not, then you can drop this flag. Otherwise, some updates might be required in the translation. Another common markup is this, the tilde character after the hashtag, which means that the translation and the source string is archived. So it's not part of the current version of the software, but it's not deleted from the PO files because a future version of the software could reuse the previously provided translation. So everything removed will survive actually in the PO file and later on can be revived to become active part of the translations. And a few other important hints that will be useful in Weblate as well. Another flag shown here, this is the C format, which refers to these placeholders or references that already came up previously. So the percentage %d stands for a decimal mark, the percentage %s stands for a string, and these two are the most commonly used references, but there are others as well. What's interesting here and super useful for translators is that sometimes the order of these two might change. And in this, I think, Turkish translation, this is actually the case. You can see that this percentage s, so the string reference becomes the first term instead of the last term of the translated string, and the percentage d is moved to the middle of the string. So with this markup, you can refer to the first, second, and so on occurrences of these references. So instead of writing percentage %d, you add the one and dollar sign, suggesting to gettext that this is the first reference from the original message ID. Another feature from the PO files that might be confusing at first is that when you see multiple lines wrapped in double quotes, those are actually concatenated into a single string later on by gettext. So this is a single string spread on 3 lines, which hopefully makes this more readable. But we could write up these 6 lines on 2 lines as well if that's someone prefers. Let's actually look up the related sources by using the reference to the source file from which this message ID was extracted. So this is the markup that I mentioned previously, the hashtag, then the colon, and then you can provide a reference to the original source files. We can look that up on the GitHub mirror of our sources, and you can see the string here. So in the sources of R, this string was actually on a single line, but gettext extracted this string from the sources of R to multiple lines to make it more readable, not to spend more than 80 characters on a single line. It's up to the user's preference, and there's no difference at all if you put this on a single line or 3 lines. Regarding the tools, you can edit a PO file in any text editor because that's just a standard text file. So you can use Emacs, Notepad++, or any other tools you like. Most editors and IDEs has support for the PO files, but if you're looking for a dedicated software, then I highly suggest the free PO edit, which is a really nice tool with some support for auto translations and so on. So you can download it for free and use it. And even more, I'm suggesting to take a look at Weblate, which is the web service that I mentioned previously, so that you do not need to clone the subversion repo or the git mirror of our source, make the edits in the PO file. Then actually you have to compile the MO files from the PO files as in the previously referenced resources suggest. So you can skip all those tasks and focus on the translation, and others maintaining the Weblate service can take care of all the technical bits. So what I would like to suggest everyone is to go to translate or translate.rx.studio, and I'm posting this on Zoom as well. Actually, I can put this full screen so that you can see in the nav bar. So translate.rx.studio is the Weblate service dedicated to the R project, uh, which includes base R and the recommended packages as well, and also dummy R package that has been used for testing. You can look around even without logging in. For example, clicking on the R project, we can see that there are many components, like around 30. And to give you some background, there's a component for every single uh, base R package. Like you can see, base R included here, the graphics package, grid, methods, and so on. And most packages are split into multiple components as well, because the R source creates PO files for different parts of the packages, namely C files provided messages to be translated are listed in a PO file, and translations extracted from the R files are provided in a separate PO file. Lastly, if there are translations regarding the R GUI, those are part of a third file, so that's why we have three components. But focusing on the translation process, you can pick a language by going to the languages screen, and you can see which language has the highest or lowest number of translated terms, and there are some statistics about the fuzzy terms and broken down into words and characters and so on. I'm looking at Hungarian because that's uh, the language I use the most. You can see that the number of translations is down to like 14% right now out of the 6,600. So there's plenty of work to be done. There are other languages with a much better coverage. Clicking on the language will show the previous view. So we can see the components again, but now all the stats are related to the actual language. And I can click on, let's say, on base R and look at either all the strings or the translated ones and also the unfinished. Let's take a look at one of the translated one. You can see from the breadcrumb here that we are looking at the Hungarian translation of the R files of base R, and you can see that something is defunct is translated into Hungarian like this. Okay, how to contribute. Let's go to the main page of Weblate because that's something everyone can easily find. And let's register. If you have not done that so far, I'm doing that as well. I'm creating a regular user so that I can walk you through that process, and please do the same. So I will use an address here using the feature of Google by using this plus sign so that I can reuse my previous, well, I mean my real email address with a suffix. My username will be, again, with a suffix. I fill in my name and there's a tricky CAPTCHA subtracting two numbers. Hopefully I give the correct answer, but I'm super anxious, so not sure. Let's try. I'm registering, and then I will have to confirm my email address. So I'm going to my inbox and hopefully I can find that email in which there's an address that I'm posting here. And it seems that I confirm my email address. I have to pick a new password. Know that it has to be at least 10 characters, so it's a pretty secure recommendation. So I'm providing my new password for this demo user, clicking change password, and then I'm logged in. All right, so I have a profile here. I'm this guy, and I can go to the front page of Weblate and look at the projects and get started. So if you don't see anything on your dashboard, that means that Weblate didn't pick a translation, sorry, a language for you automatically. Maybe because the local is not set on the machine or some other things. Anyway, you can access all the projects by going to projects and browse all projects so that we can click on the R project again. So I'm clicking on R. And now I will try to contribute something in Hungarian by going to languages like we did previously, going to the Hungarian language again, and looking at a component where not everything is translated. Well, in this case, that's pretty easy to pick because There are no fully translated components. I'm clicking on base R. If you have already registered, signed in, then please do the same. Of course, not for Hungarian, but for the language you have picked. And here we can see some statistics about this component and language. You can see that there are some unfinished strings, so we should focus on those or on the untranslated strings. The difference is probably in review or the fuzzy flag for some of those strings. Another approach is simply clicking on the translate, which will take you to the untranslated strings. So clicking on that will show the first string that needs to be translated into Hungarian from base R. The English term is a dimension is 0. So here what I can do is either click on the nearby strings, which will show some strings that are similar to the one that we need to translate so that we can look up like how dimension is being translated into Hungarian. So scrolling through, you will see some English and Hungarian string pairs and maybe use some of those as a starting point. Another option is looking at the automatic suggestions, which provides some ML tools for helping your work. We have integrated the Microsoft Translators API, so it will automatically look up the translation for this term into Hungarian, which is this term. If you wish, you can click on clone to translation, which will copy that term here and you can make edits, or you can click accept if it looks totally fine. Actually, this translation is not correct because a dimension is not a definite term, although the translated one is. So I'm updating this to this one. If you are unsure about the translation, you can mark this needs editing flag here so that someone later on speaking the same language can review and approve your translation. If you're sure, then you can unmark this and click save and continue so that you get the next text for translation, which is a bit longer than the previous one. There's an auto translation coming up again. So if you leave the automatic suggestions tab on, then Microsoft Translator will always suggest something for you that you can clone again, click accept or make some edits. So this is the process to translate different terms to the language you have selected. Uh, Before we move on to give you some time to make some translations, I would like to highlight some features that might be useful. So I'm going back to the R project and I'm picking another component, which is not the R files, but the C files, because the messages extracted from the C files have some extra features compared to the messages extracted from the R files that I would like to show to you. So let's start translating one of these strings. So non-finite value supplied by Optim. Everything looks similar to the R files, except the source string location. So R is using gettext, which has support for extracting the source string location as well. This is not implemented for the R files, but this is super useful because if you do not know what is the context for this message, which could be a message, a warning, or an error as well, then you can look up the related sources right from Weblate by clicking that reference. So instead of cloning the R core repo and looking up the file, you have access to the related sources with a single click of a button, and you can look up if the related source code helps you to understand why this message is being printed. From this, for example, it's visible now that this is an error message. so we should translate it keeping that in mind. So the source string location is useful. Please take a look if you're unsure about what the original message is about, and looking at that might help you to figure out how that term should be translated. Another helpful guide is looking at how the term was translated to other languages. If you are speaking multiple languages, then this it provides some pointers for you, like how it was translated to French, German, and so on. And the previously mentioned nearby strings might also provide some useful terms for you. Something I have not mentioned regarding Weblate is that you can also provide some comments, and you can use this interface to discuss how a term needs to be translated to the language of your choice. So here you can provide a translation comment and discuss everything with others. But there's another option. If you see, let's say, a typo in the original English string, you can also provide a comment here, and that comment would actually result in a Slack message pointed at some of the maintainers of this Weblate service, and we can follow up with our core and create a patch file so that a string is fixed within the source. You can also take a look at the history. The history is actually a Git history of the translations, because Weblate is using a Git repo to store everything in the background. So if you wish, you can also just clone that repo and work on your own and contribute back from your local machine if you wish. Although I really think that this Weblate service is super nice and provides some useful features so that it's easier to use compared to a local text editor, especially due to the integration of some ML tools, and also due to being able to look up the nearby strings and so on. So I will stop here. We are at 42. I would like you to spend the next 10 minutes to make some translations using Weblate. So if you have not registered, please do so. Log in. Pick a language that you know very well and make some translations from English. And we will review the activity after that 10 minutes. In the meantime, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and I will try to get back to you. And otherwise, we will review some of the community guidelines after you get more familiar with Weblate. So please go ahead and work on some of the translations. If you get stuck, again, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom, or raise your hand and I will try to help you debug with any issues. I see a question coming up in the Q&A section from Ivan. Thank you very much for that. So the question is, where do the anonymous suggestions come from on Weblate? Let me log out and take a look. So as mentioned previously, you have access to the projects even without logging in, and you can look at the translations. And if you're taking a look at the actual translations, you can suggest without logging in. So I think some of those anonymous translation suggestions are coming from this way. Of course, if someone suggests a translation that will not be committed back uh, to the repo, even in Weblate, so that would be only stored in the database of Weblate, and then a logged in user would need to review that and accept it so that it's committed to Weblate's Git repo. And then when we are generating a patch file for our core, which is usually done once a quarter, then it would be contributed back. So there are actually quite a few steps involved until a suggestion is actually accepted back into our core. So I think the anonymous suggestions are coming from this feature. And another potential explanation might be some batch imports into Weblate with a user. We have done quite a few reviews, some automated reviews of translations, making sure that, for example, the F uh, as as printf references are included in the translated terms correctly, and some of those might have been provided as an anonymous suggestion. But I think the case you are referring to is coming from this approach. So hopefully I have answered the question, but feel free to follow up and we'll try to get back to you. Also, and by the way, this was super cool. So thank you very much for raising this. The suggest feature is actually very different than committing something with the needs added. So there are multiple levels of optional reviews in the system. And to show that, let me log in back. Well, I think I can log in with my additional user. So if you're unsure about translation, you can suggest that so that it would be stored in Weblate's database and someone can review. And then you can also commit translation into Weblate, but mark it that it needs editing and the language team uh, leader needs to review and approve this. And by the way, I think this is a good time to follow up on the community aspects of translations. I have a slide to share about that and review some of the uh, related topics. But before we do that, let's quickly check on the activity that we have just done in the past few minutes. I'm opening up the R project now, clicking on Insights, and actually this history feature is available publicly, so you do not need to be an admin or even logged in to take a look. And you can see that there are quite a lot of translations going on. Even just looking at the past minute, we can see that there are like a dozen of translations in Turkish, Russian, Catalan, and German, and some other languages as well. So this is great. I can see some updates here, fixing typos, removing extra white space, and also brand new translations as well. So this is very, very cool. Thank you very much for all those contributions. Uh, all these will make back to our core, and others will be able to take value from your contributions. So regarding the process, once you commit a translation into Weblate, if there's a team regarding your language, then there will be a review process and someone will make sure that your translation is correct and approve it. Consider that just like pull request or merge request reviews when writing code. If there's no dedicated team for a language, then whatever you commit will be automatically approved, and we will contribute that to our core in the quarterly uh, patch file. But to take a look at a more structured review on these community aspects, I've included a slide here. This is a quick review on what we have covered in Weblate, but let's move to the next slide. So opening up some of the previously shown references. One is the translation guideline, and this is a document that was born last year at the R project sprint, where at least a dozen of enthusiastic R users and translators came together to work on our translations and also to discuss the work how to do a good job. So this is the result of that discussion. Here you can see how to get started with translating R. A first suggestion that I also included in one of the slides is to join the R contributor Slack so that you can chat with folks with a similar mindset like you who would like to translate messages in R. And you can also get help from others. It's also, I think, a good channel to get to know others speaking the same language as you and work together on the translations. Then you can find the reference to Weblate that you have just signed up to and contributed translations, and then we can get into the conventions of the translations. Uh, I think it's useful to review this page. It's not too long, but summarizes how translations are to be done as a community, which includes the different roles at teams. And basically, this is what I've described previously. If there are multiple persons working on the same language, it's really good to have some team leaders who can make sure that the quality of the translations is good enough to commit back. There are no typos. Folks are using the same terms for the same things, and we can keep the translations at a high quality. So there's a dedicated reviewer workflow in Weblate which is set up, which means that whoever contributes a translation, someone else, in most cases from the team leaders, needs to review and approve that. If there are no other folks speaking the same language as you, then translations would be directly committed without a review because there's no one to do the review. Regarding some further resources and guidelines specific to different languages, you can find that on the very same page as well, including some rules that I highly suggest you to go through when you have some time and before continuing making translations in Weblate. Uh, from a pedagogical approach, it might have been better to go through the rules first instead of asking you to make some translations, but I really wanted to make sure that everyone gets familiar with Weblate and see that how easy it can be to contribute back to our core with translation. So hopefully that worked. But once you get more serious about translations, it's good to keep all the rules that were made by this small group previously based on the experiences collected in the past few years. All right, there's a question coming up if it's possible to contact the translator on Weblate. Uh, that's a great question. Uh, Actually, Weblate is independent from both our core and also if I'm going to the projects, you can see that we have included some of the, well, I think all the recommended packages. So some of these recommended packages are part of the subversion maintained by our core. Some of these are on GitHub, some are on RForge and so on, but the maintainer is not affiliated with this Weblate service. So how this is being managed is that we have this service, folks are working on the translations, and then the admins of Weblate are contributing, are collecting all these uh, translations and contributing back to our core or to the maintainer of the different packages. So you cannot directly contact the maintainers on Weblate. On the other hand, if I'm, let's look up, let's say, some of these translations. So this is for the matrix package, which is a recommended one. If you look up the related source, then this is on RForge. And if I go to the package, then you will be able to find the related description file. So what I would suggest, if you have an issue to report to the maintainer, then I would actually open up the related description file that you can find based on the source string location and contact the maintainer there. If it's related to our core or an R or a recommended package maintained by our core, then you can totally use the comments feature uh, and provide a comment as a source string comment, and we will be able to proxy to our core. Another approach is to go to Bugzilla and file an issue yourself. So hopefully that answers the question. Back to the community efforts. So please make sure to go through the recommended rules, and it's really up to the language teams how they wish to do the translations, but these recommendations has been collected over the past few years. I think those are great starting points. I know that time is up very soon, so I would like to thank you for attending this tutorial. Hopefully you have found it useful. I'm super grateful already for your contributions in Weblate, and we will make sure that all those translations will make back to our core in the next patch. And please keep translating, and please refer to the Weblate service to others, and get some help from others speaking the same language. And let's make R more accessible around the world for everyone, independent of what language they are speaking in their daily life. So it's time to wrap up. Thank you very much, everyone, and looking forward to your contributions again. Bye bye.